You are not broke because you lack money. You are broke because you tolerate a version of yourself that accepts less. That sentence alone will offend some people, and that's exactly why it needs to be said. Because most people spend their entire lives chasing strategies, watching videos, reading books, trying to fix their finances from the outside in. They tweak budgets, they search for side hustles, they look for the next opportunity, the next shortcut, the next secret, and yet nothing fundamentally changes. Not for long. They might make a little more money for a short period of time. They might get a raise. They might hit a lucky streak. But sooner or later, almost invisibly, they return to the same financial level they've always lived at. Because the problem was never the money, it was the identity behind it. Two people can be given the same opportunity, the same resources, even the same starting point, and still end up in completely different places. One builds something, the other wastes it. One multiplies, the other loses. And if you look closely enough, you'll notice something uncomfortable. It's not intelligence. It's not luck. It's not even effort. It's what they believe they are worth. Most people believe their financial life is the result of what they do, but in reality, it is the result of who they are. And until that shifts, nothing else will. Here's the truth that very few people are willing to confront. Your life does not rise to the level of your goals. It falls to the level of your identity. You can set ambitious goals. You can write them down. You can visualize success. You can even feel motivated for a few days, maybe a few weeks. But when that motivation fades, and it always does, you don't stay at the level of your ambition. You fall back to the level of your self-image, to the version of yourself you have accepted as normal. And that version determines everything. It determines how much you earn, how much you keep, what you tolerate, what you walk away from, what you believe is possible for you, and what is not. Most people never question this. They assume their current situation is just how life is. They blame the market, the economy, their background, their circumstances. But those are surface-level explanations. The real cause is deeper, quieter, and far more dangerous. It's the invisible ceiling you've built in your own mind. You see, every person operates within a range of what they believe they deserve. Not what they want, not what they dream about, but what they feel deep down they are entitled to have. And no matter how much effort you put in, no matter how hard you work, you will always find a way to stay within that range. If you start earning more than that internal limit, something strange begins to happen. You spend more, you hesitate, you make poor decisions, you delay action. Not consciously, but predictably, because your mind is trying to bring you back to what feels normal. And if you earn less than that range, you feel discomfort, pressure, urgency, and suddenly you find a way to recover, to climb back, to stabilize, almost like a thermostat, set to a certain temperature. It doesn't matter what happens outside, the system always adjusts to return to its set point. Your financial life works the same way, and that set point is your identity. This is why effort alone will never make you wealthy. You can work harder than everyone around you and still remain stuck. Because effort operates on the surface, identity operates underneath. Effort is what you do. Identity is who you believe you are, and who you believe you are will always override what you try to do. That's why some people sabotage their own success the moment it starts to grow. They get an opportunity and hesitate. They receive money and waste it. They reach a new level and then unconsciously destroy it. Not because they are lazy, not because they are incapable, but because that level does not match their internal identity. And anything that doesn't match your identity will not last. Let that sink in. You don't rise to success and stay there because you worked hard once. You stay there because it aligns with who you believe you are. If deep down you see yourself as someone who struggles, you will always find a way back to struggle. If deep down you see yourself as someone who is just getting by, then no matter how much you earn, you will always end up just getting by. And this is where most people get it completely wrong. They focus on changing their actions without ever changing their identity. They try to force discipline without addressing the belief system underneath it. They try to build wealth while still holding on to the same internal story that kept them broke. And that is a battle they will never win, because identity is not something you outwork. It is something you either confront or remain controlled by. Think about it. How many times have you told yourself you would change? That this time would be different? That you would be more disciplined, more focused, more consistent? And maybe for a short time you were, but then slowly, subtly, you slipped back into the same habits, the same patterns, the same results, not because you didn't try, but because you were still operating from the same identity. You were trying to create a new life with an old self, and that never works, because your current identity is not just a thought, it is a system built from years of repetition, from experiences, from beliefs, from the stories you've told yourself over and over again. I'm not good with money. I'm not the business type. I'm just not lucky. This is just how things are for me. These are not harmless thoughts. They are commands, instructions. They define the boundaries of your life. And until you challenge them, until you replace them, those boundaries will remain. No matter how much information you consume, no matter how many strategies you learn, no matter how motivated you feel today, because motivation does not break identity, only awareness and deliberate change. And that's where this conversation begins. Not with money, not with tactics, but with truth. A truth most people spend their lives avoiding. You are not stuck because of your situation. You are stuck because of the version of yourself you have accepted. And until that version changes, your life will not. You don't need another strategy. You don't need another opportunity. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment. What you need is to see clearly, to recognize that the ceiling you've been hitting was never above you. It was within you. And once you see that, really see it, you can never go back to thinking the same way again. Because now the question is no longer, how do I make more money? The question becomes, who do I need to become to no longer live like this? And that question changes everything. If you're still waiting for the outside world to change your life, you're going to be waiting for a very long time. Because the real prison you're in has no walls. It's not your job, it's not your income, it's not your environment, it's your identity. And the most dangerous thing about this prison is that it feels normal. You wake up, you go through your routine, you make decisions, you react to situations, and everything feels reasonable, justified, familiar. You don't feel trapped, but you are, because every decision you make is filtered through a version of yourself that has already decided what you are worth. And that decision controls everything that follows. Think about how you handle money. Not what you say you want to do, but what you actually do. Do you hesitate when it's time to invest in yourself? Do you undercharge for your work, even when you know you're worth more? Do you feel a quiet discomfort when you think about earning beyond a certain level? That discomfort is not random. It is your identity defending its territory. You see, every person has what can only be described as a financial thermostat, a set point, an invisible range of income, lifestyle, and expectation that feels normal to them. And just like a thermostat in a room, no matter how much the temperature fluctuates, the system always works to bring it back to that set point. If the temperature rises too high, it cools it down. If it drops too low, it heats it back up. Your financial life operates the same way. If you suddenly earn more than your identity is comfortable with, you won't feel secure. You'll feel tension, and that tension will push you to act in ways that bring you back down. You might spend impulsively. You might procrastinate on opportunities. You might make decisions that don't make sense on the surface, but make perfect sense when you understand the deeper pattern. You are not losing control. You are restoring familiarity. Because your mind values what is familiar more than what is beneficial. Now flip it the other way. If your income drops below your internal standard, below what you believe you should have, you feel pressure. You take action. You hustle. You find a way to climb back. Not because you suddenly became more capable, but because your identity refuses to stay below that level. This is the loop most people never see. They think their financial situation is a result of circumstance, but in reality, it is a result of self-regulation, an internal system constantly adjusting your behavior to match your identity. And until that identity changes, the system will keep running, quietly, relentlessly, and predictably. This is why people who win the lottery often end up broke again within a few years. It's not because they didn't have enough money. It's because they didn't have the identity to hold on to it. The money was new, but the person was the same, and the same person will always create the same outcome. This is the identity loop. Low self-worth creates cautious behavior. Cautious behavior limits opportunities. Limited opportunities reinforce low income. And low income confirms the original belief. Over and over again, a closed system, a prison, and the bars of that prison are not made of steel. They are made of beliefs. Beliefs about what you deserve. Beliefs about what is possible. Beliefs about who you are. And here's where it gets even more dangerous, because most of these beliefs were never consciously chosen. They were absorbed from your environment, from your upbringing, from the people around you, from repeated experiences that slowly shaped your perception of yourself. You didn't sit down one day and decide, I'm going to limit my income, I'm going to play small, I'm going to sabotage my own success. You adapted, you adjusted, you became consistent with the version of yourself that was reinforced over time. And now, that version is running your life, silently, automatically, every time you hesitate to take a risk, every time you settle for less than you know you're capable of, every time you delay action because something doesn't feel right. That's not intuition, that's conditioning. That's the identity prison doing its job, keeping you exactly where you've always been. Because the truth is, you are not afraid of failure. You are afraid of becoming someone unfamiliar, someone who operates at a higher level, someone who demands more, someone who no longer fits into the identity you've been living with for years. Growth is not uncomfortable because it is hard. Growth is uncomfortable because it threatens who you believe you are. And most people will choose a familiar struggle over an unfamiliar success. Let that sink in. They will stay in a life they don't want because it feels like them. And they will reject opportunities that could change everything because it doesn't. That is the power of identity. It doesn't just influence your life, it defines it. This is why comfort is so dangerous, because comfort is not safety. Comfort is repetition. It is the reinforcement of patterns that keep you exactly where you are. You think you're avoiding risk, but what you're really avoiding is change. And in doing so, you are guaranteeing one thing, that nothing meaningful will ever be different. Because the system is working exactly as designed to protect the current version of you, even if that version is keeping you broke, even if that version is holding you back, even if that version is the very thing you say you want to escape. This is the paradox most people never resolve. They want a different life, but they are unwilling to become a different person. And so they stay stuck, not because they lack potential, but because they are loyal to a version of themselves that no longer serves them. So the question is not, why am I not making more money? The question is, why am I still operating as someone who doesn't? Because until you answer that, honestly, you will keep repeating the same patterns, the same results, the same frustrations, and you will call it bad luck, or timing, or circumstance, when in reality, it was identity all along. And here is the uncomfortable truth that changes everything. You don't need more information. You don't need more strategies. You don't need to wait for a better opportunity. You need to break the prison. You need to step outside the version of yourself that has been quietly controlling every outcome in your life. Because until you do, nothing changes. Not permanently, not meaningfully, not in a way that lasts. You might get temporary wins, you might feel progress, but eventually, the system will pull you back to what is familiar, back to what is comfortable, back to who you believe you are. And if you're honest with yourself, you've seen this happen before. So now the question becomes unavoidable. If your identity is the prison, then who would you be? Without it, awareness is powerful, but awareness alone changes nothing. You can see the pattern, you can understand the loop, you can even admit, honestly, that your identity has been holding you back. And yet, without action, you will remain exactly where you are. Because insight does not break identity. Action does. This is where most people fail. Not because they don't understand the problem, but because they are unwilling to confront what it actually takes to change it. They think identity shifts through thinking, through affirmations, through motivation, through feeling ready. But identity doesn't respond to what you say, it responds to what you repeatedly do. And if your actions stay the same, your identity will stay the same, no matter how inspired you feel in this moment. So, if you're serious about changing your life, about breaking out of the identity prison you've been living in, then you have to be willing to do something most people avoid. You have to destroy the old version of yourself, not improve it, not tweak it, not negotiate with it, destroy it. Because the version of you that created your current life is not the version that will create the next one. And holding on to it while hoping for a different outcome is the fastest way to stay stuck forever. The first step is brutally simple. You have to identify the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. Not the one you present to others, not the one you wish were true, but the one that shows up in your decisions, in your hesitation, in your patterns, the story that says, "I'm not that type of person, I can't do that. That's not for me. People like me don't succeed like that." These are not casual thoughts, they are identity anchors. They define your limits, and until you see them clearly, you will continue to operate within them. So you bring them to the surface. You stop pretending they're not there. You write them down if you have to. You look at them without judgment, but without excuses. Because you cannot change what you refuse to confront. But seeing the story is only the beginning. The next step is to kill it. Not argue with it, not soften it, kill it. You do not negotiate with a belief that has been keeping you small. You replace it completely. Because as long as that old narrative exists even in the background, it will continue to influence your behavior. It will whisper doubt. It will justify hesitation. It will pull you back into the familiar. So you don't just change what you think. You change what you accept as truth. Instead of, "I'm not good with money," you decide, "I am someone who learns fast and adapts faster." Instead of, "I can't charge that much," you decide, "I only operate at a level that reflects my value." But here's where most people get it wrong again. They think changing the statement is enough. It's not. Words without action are meaningless. Identity is not built through declarations. It is built through evidence, which means the real work begins after the decision. You have to install new standards, not goals. Standards. Because goals are something you chase. Standards are something you live by. A goal says, "I want to earn more." A standard says, "I no longer accept being underpaid." A goal says, "I want to be more disciplined." A standard says, "I do what needs to be done, regardless of how I feel." And that difference changes everything. Because standards don't require motivation, they require commitment. Once you raise your standards, your behavior must follow, not eventually, immediately. This is where the shift becomes real. You begin to act in ways that your old identity would resist. You charge more even when it feels uncomfortable. You say no even when you're afraid of losing approval. You take action before you feel ready. And every time you do that, you create evidence. Evidence that you are no longer the same person. Evidence that the old story no longer applies. Evidence that a new identity is forming. This is the evidence loop, and it is one of the most powerful forces you can tap into. Because once your brain sees consistent proof, it updates, it adapts. It begins to accept the new version of you as real. But there's a catch. In the beginning, it will feel wrong, unnatural, even fake. You will feel like you're pretending, like you're forcing something that isn't truly you. And most people stop right there. They interpret that discomfort as a sign that something is off, that they're not ready, that they should go back to what feels normal. But that discomfort is the exact signal you need to pay attention to, because it means you are stepping outside the identity that has been controlling you. It means you are breaking the pattern. It means you are no longer operating on autopilot. And that is where transformation begins. Not when it feels easy, but when it feels unfamiliar and you do it anyway. You have to understand this clearly. Your old identity will fight back. It will try to pull you into old habits, old thoughts, old behaviors. It will tell you, this isn't you, this won't last, you're pushing too hard. And if you listen, you will go right back to where you started. So you don't negotiate, you don't slow down, you don't wait for comfort, you continue. Because every time you act in alignment with your new standard, you weaken the old identity and you strengthen the new one. This is not about perfection. You will slip, you will hesitate, you will have moments where the old version of you shows up again. That's part of the process, but what matters is what you do next. Do you fall back into the pattern, or do you correct it immediately? Because identity is not built in a single decision. It is built in repeated correction, in consistent alignment, in the willingness to choose the higher version of yourself again and again until it becomes automatic. This is how you break the prison, not through thinking, not through wishing, but through deliberate, repeated action that contradicts everything your old identity stands for. And over time, something shifts. The actions that once felt forced become natural. The decisions that once felt uncomfortable become obvious. The standard you once had to remind yourself of becomes who you are. And when that happens, everything changes, because now you are no longer trying to build a new life. You are operating as the person who already has it. And that person does not think the same, does not tolerate the same, does not settle the same. They move differently, they decide differently, they live differently, and their results reflect that. So, if you're waiting for the moment where you feel ready, that moment is not coming. Readiness is a myth. Confidence is built after action, not before it. And identity is built the same way. You act first, you prove it to yourself, and then you become it. At some point, it stops being about effort. It stops being about forcing yourself, pushing yourself, trying to stay motivated. Because the truth is, motivation was never meant to carry you. Identity was, and once your identity begins to shift, everything that once felt difficult starts to feel natural, not easy, but aligned. This is the point most people never reach. They spend their lives trying to change their results without ever becoming the person those results belong to. And so they struggle, they push harder, they try more strategies, they burn out, because they are constantly fighting themselves. But when identity changes, there is no fight, there is direction, there is clarity, there is consistency without the constant need for motivation. Because now, you are no longer acting against who you are. You are acting as who you are. This is what real transformation looks like. Not a temporary spike in discipline, not a short burst of productivity, but a permanent shift in identity, a shift where your standards rise and never fall back, a shift where your behavior aligns without constant resistance, a shift where the version of you that once felt impossible becomes your baseline. And from that point forward, your life begins to reflect it. You don't need to chase success. You don't need to force outcomes, because outcomes are no longer something you pursue, they are something you produce. Naturally, consistently, predictably. This is the discipline code. Not discipline as punishment, not discipline as restriction, but discipline as identity. A way of being, a way of operating, a standard you live by regardless of how you feel. Because feelings change, circumstances change, but identity, when it is truly established, does not. And that is where your power comes from becoming someone who no longer negotiates with excuses, someone who no longer tolerates low standards, someone who no longer waits for the perfect moment. You act, you decide, you move, because that is who you are now. And when you reach this level, something else begins to happen, something most people never experience. Your world starts to change. Not because the world itself is different, but because you are. You see opportunities where you once saw obstacles. You take action where you once hesitated. You attract different conversations, different environments, different results, because you are no longer operating at the same level. You are no longer making decisions from the same identity, and everything responds to that. Your income changes because your standards changed. Your habits change because your identity changed. Your results change because your behavior aligned with who you became. Not because you got lucky, not because you found a secret, but because you became someone who produces different outcomes. This is what most people misunderstand about success. They think it's something external, something to chase, something to earn. But success is internal. It is built layer by layer, decision by decision, action by action, until one day, it is no longer something you are trying to achieve. It is something you embody. And once you embody it, it compounds quietly, powerfully, relentlessly. Every small action reinforces your identity. Every aligned decision strengthens your standard. Every day, you show up as the new version of yourself, builds momentum. And that momentum changes everything, because now you are no longer starting over. You are building forward. You are no longer breaking habits. You are reinforcing them. You are no longer fighting your nature. You are expressing it. And over time, the gap between who you were and who you are becomes undeniable. The life you once thought was out of reach becomes your reality. Not overnight, not instantly, but inevitably, because identity, when sustained, always produces results. So the question is no longer, can you succeed? The question is, can you maintain the identity required for success? Because anyone can act differently for a day, for a week, even for a month, but very few people can sustain it. Very few people can hold the line when it gets uncomfortable, when motivation fades, when results are slow, when the old version of themselves starts calling them back. And that is where most people break. They go back to what is familiar, back to what is easy, back to who they used to be. And in doing so, they reset everything. But not you, not if you understand what's at stake. Because this is not about money, this is not about status, this is not about proving anything to anyone else. This is about control. Control over your life. Control over your direction. Control over the version of yourself you choose to become. Because whether you realize it or not, you are always choosing. Every day, every decision, you are either reinforcing the identity that keeps you stuck or building the one that sets you free. There is no neutral. There is no standing still. You are either growing or repeating. So if you're still waiting for the right moment, waiting for confidence, waiting for things to feel easier, because the life you want will never be built by the version of you that is waiting. It will be built by the version of you that decides, that commits, that acts regardless of how it feels. And that version is available to you right now, not in the future, not when things are perfect, but it requires one thing, a decision to stop identifying with the person you used to be, a decision to stop tolerating the patterns that kept you there, a decision to step into a new standard and refuse to step back. Because once you make that decision, truly make it, there is no going back. You see things differently, you move differently, you live differently, and your life begins to reflect that. So understand this clearly. Your life will not change when you earn more. It will not change when you get lucky. It will not change when the circumstances improve. Your life changes the moment you stop accepting less than you are capable of being, the moment you refuse to return to the old version of yourself, the moment you commit to becoming someone different. Because in the end, wealth is not something you chase. It is something you become capable of holding. And that capability is built from identity. So if you want a different life, don't ask for more, become more. And once you do, everything else will follow.